in the time that we have, or and we don't. I'll just say this: we're not going to be here here in Montpelier forever, but we are here for a couple more weeks. So, we think. So anything that we don't get to today, and I'm sure there'll be a lot that we don't get to today, we can try and continue the conversation next week or the following week. But with that, why don't we get started? And is there something we should be looking for on our screens? If we
I've
have
given you a copy of the presentation we're going to use, as well as this, which is just a summary of district programs. I didn't bring enough paper copies for everybody, but I can certainly pass a couple on.
Oh, that's right. We're doing some paper digital.
If you'd like to look at that. So that's all the variety of programs that districts work in, which districts do.
Okay, well, let's get started.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm Jill Arachi. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Association of Conservation Districts. I have a team with me, including one of our supervisors, the chair of NRCC, who's on Zoom, several district managers, and another one of our staff, the AC staff, our finance director, who will also help. So we're going to give you a brief presentation. We have 10 slides. Feel free to interrupt and ask questions. Every slide is action-packed. We heard Mike O'Grady's testimony yesterday, where there heard more questions than we probably have time to answer today, but have a few, sounds like priority questions that you would be interested in that we'll attempt to address. And thank you very much for bringing us back. We're really happy to have the opportunity to talk about our statute. We've been talking about it internally also. As you know, we're an association of conservation districts, and each district has a board. DHD has a board, council has a board. So there will be somewhat of an elaborate process over the summer reflecting on our statute, and we'll be happy to come in the fall with suggestions, as well as have informal dialogue with you along the way throughout the summer, anyone who's interested. So these are our goals for reviewing our statute, to educate the General Assembly about the statutory role of conservation districts, how we operate, and learn about your questions so that we can address them. Revisit the legislative intent and history of conservation districts and how it's implemented in modern day practice. Raise awareness of our the infrastructure we provide. Conservation districts provide a delivery system statewide and nationwide. And then we're hoping to identify a sustainable revenue source to help NRCC and our conservation districts do more. We feel like there are many opportunities for districts to do more. We have that historically in our mandate and have done it, and really we're a little hamstrung by the funding situation. So that's the first sweep, and I'm going to hand it off to Rick Hopkins, who's the chair of NRCC and on Zoom.
Good morning, Rick.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? I'm yelling as loud as I can from down here on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So am I coming across okay?
Yeah, you don't need to yell quite as loudly.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you for having us today. This next slide is the policy statement of our enabling legislation for Natural Resource Conservation Council and also the conservation districts. My understanding is your presentation yesterday from Mike O'Grady, you've seen this slide. So importantly, there's an acknowledgement of our natural resources, land and air and water natural resources, and how the conservation districts are really sort of charged to help protect those in order to promote health, safety and general welfare of the state of the people within Vermont. So I won't dwell on that. Jill, if you could advance to the next slide. And yeah, this slide, there's a lot going on here, but importantly, Jill, there may be some more information that's missing on top, but there we go. State of Vermont, the governor and the legislature make important allocation decisions about funding. That funding typically flows from the state to the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, And then the Vermont Agency of Agriculture allocates that funding to the Natural Resources Conservation Council. Council is comprised of 6 supervisory unions. Each supervisory union consists of 2 or more conservation districts. So the affected conservation districts basically appoint a supervisor from one of those conservation districts to be the supervisory union representative. There's also representative from ANR, from the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, from UVM Extension. We also have a representative on council from the Natural Resource Conservation Service from USDA. That individual is a non-voting sort of technical advisor to council. And typically council will meet on a quarterly basis. Once we make our decisions about how to allocate funding, and council does more than just allocate funding, of course. We're trying to communicate with the districts, understand their concerns, their issues, their needs, and then accordingly feed those pieces of information up to the affected state agencies. Was there, should I just keep going or?
Yes, yeah, you can keep going, I think.
Okay. So yeah, just trying to walk you through this slide, but again, we have a very close relationship. Council has a close relationship with NRCS and also with the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts. Working very closely, of course, with the 14 districts that are scattered throughout the state. And then finally, most importantly, bringing our services and staff to landowners, municipalities, farm producers, the general public on a wide variety of natural resource conservation matters, stormwater control, riparian issues, runoff controls from farms and forest lands. So we're engaged with a wide variety of individuals and organizations. And because of our structure, council plays a key role in that, working closely with the conservation districts. So this is a presentation I think that we're going to leave behind so you can study all the fine print in greater detail. But if there aren't any questions, I guess I will pass the baton over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Rick. And just before you advance the slide, I was going to remark that it is rather complex. Trying to wrap our heads around what conservation districts do.
Can't see if she's there, but
she is here, Rick. Yeah, I was just noting that there's an intricate web here that involves the individual districts, the association that represents the districts, the council, and then USDA.
So Jill, Claire, do we have a backup plan?
You might not.
Yeah. I don't know whether, Rick, can you hear us?
Sounds like you can hear you.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'll text it.
Or Laura, are we?
We have no problem with our audio.
Okay.
Yeah.
He can't hear us, but I just have a question about the slides.
Sure, yeah. Do you want to go back to that slide and then, thank you.
I just wondered, is most of the funding, or where's the source of the funding for the state of Vermont? Is it general fund, or is it coming from essentially like NRCS dollars?
Well, all over. The source of funding for NRCC, you can answer that part. And then the rest of the funding comes from.
Claire, can you hear me?
I'm just gonna do it. Do you want to answer the
Yes,
question?
all
about
right. Do you want me to
general
come
fund?
back so that you guys can?
Thank you.
Put two chairs here. If this person can give up her folding chair. If you can give up your folding chair, then they both can sit there.
Sorry. No problem. NRCC receives a core grant of general funds through the Agency of Agriculture. For many, many years, that was $112,000. NRCC retained a teeny amount for administration and the rest was dispersed to conservation districts. Last year, the legislature gave us an extra $250,000. And at this point, that's where we seem to be headed this year as well, which districts can use to implement their regulatory requirements and manage the districts. All the rest of the funding comes from mostly competitive grants from the state and the feds. And I'll just rattle off a few agencies. So, and some of them come through NRCC, some of them come through the ACD, and the districts also write grants for themselves. And have the independent grants directly. Agriculture, most of the money for districts comes through the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets.
And where are they getting it from? Is it just?
Clean Water Fund.
Oh, okay.
The Clean Water Fund. DEC, same. So agriculture, it's a combination, primarily technical assistance and education and outreach. And then some implementation. We're known for providing nutrient management planning services in partnership with UVM Extension to small farms, especially uncertified small farm operations. And DEC, also Clean Water Fund, it's for individual projects, stormwater, tree planting, culvert replacement, those kinds of projects. Participating in tactical basin planning process, project development and repairing buffer plantings. And then federally, districts get money from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It complements those buffer planting projects, often for more complex stream restorations or dam removals or some of those things. And the district managers will tell you a little bit about their programs. And then most districts receive free office space and facilities from NRCS. And then the federal money right now is running through the ACD. We chose that, we did that kind of deliberately as sort of a risk management strategy for council, as council was growing and there was a point in time where council was almost eliminated and we were actually sort of a risk management strategy. The ACD gets the federal audit annually so that there's that accountability and we didn't want to have two entities needing for federal audit. So it's been strategic, but it's not necessary. And districts on the ground collaborate very closely with NRCS. The ag-related funding is very much managed collectively by a group of agencies to represent all programs. It's a key area. Jennifer's district does this a lot, where the district staff are representing farmers' all programs, not just the Agency of Ag program or the NRCS programs. I'll stop there because I don't want to take all morning.
John, does that Clean Water Fund, is it EPA or is it a combination of like USDA and EPA
That
dollars?
Clean Water Fund is Vermont generated funding. It has its own revenue stream. So it's partly property transfer tax, partly unclaimed bottle deposits. It's cheats, they call them as cheats. And then there is some ARPA money that's been put in the Clean Water Fund. That was an exception. But generally it's generated by the state of Vermont, that encompasses state funds. There are all kinds of other EPA funds run through DC.
Right.
While we're thinking about funding and just while we still have this map up, so the 250,000, maybe a different number this coming year, that is allocated to the council.
Yes.
And then does the council make decisions annually on how to disperse that to the districts?
Yes, absolutely. And we had an extensive process because it's been a growth opportunity for us to decide how to do that. And at this time, because we still don't have one staff member funded, we're distributing the funds equally across districts so that they can get up to at least one staff member funded by general fund.
So you're talking about the grants you receive at the level that you're aren't the districts also
Yes.
reaching out and writing grants?
Yes, I'd like to
Yes.
let Jennifer speak to that.
Okay, thank you,
I want you to hear
Yeah,
from
I
others.
would say between me and Hillary, we probably manage about 80 different grants
Mhm.
at our two districts alone. Yes, we have to fundraise for our own districts as well.
And how much of your work time does it take out of your day?
At least half, maybe more than half of managing grants.
So this process is limiting your ability to do your job, basically.
It's definitely restricting our time, yeah, providing direct technical service. Mhm.
We wrote 168 grants in 2022. Districts, VACD, and council together. And it's always been over 100, or at least in the last 5 years, to raise the money.
Jennifer, introduce yourself and then let's hear what you got to say.
My name's Jennifer Byrne. I'm the district manager of the White River NRCD, Natural Resource Conservation District. We cover Orange and some of Windsor and 3 towns in Addison County. I'm going to walk through a few slides on the organization of districts, sort of the history and our election process. So going way back to the 30s and the Dust Bowl, the Soil Erosion Service, which became the Soil Conservation Service, which became the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, had been conducting their work out in the field, and they quickly realized that they really needed local knowledge to be effective, and that they wrote a recommendation. The USDA managers at the time recommended establishing democratically organized soil conservation districts to implement conservation and conservation planning at the local level. And so a really unique process took place where the USDA wrote a sample state legislation, and they gave it out to all 50 states and even the territories. All of the states and territories adopted some form of that legislation, and they all still stand today. So there are now over 3,000 conservation districts across all 57 US states and territories. And we're called different things. Some of them are called soil and water conservation districts. We're natural resource conservation districts, so you might hear different types of districts, but we're all established for the same reasons at around the same time period. And so in Vermont, the Soil Conservation Act was written and passed around 1939, 1940. Poultney Meadowy Conservation District was the first district to be established. So a group of landowners came together, petitioned for the establishment of the district, and then that happened across Vermont. So now we have 14 districts that cover every corner of Vermont. There are sections in the statute that are only about the formation of the district, and then there are certain sections that are about what would happen if we wanted to create more, if we wanted to split some of the larger districts up, or change our boundaries, since some of us are county-based and some of us are watershed-based in the state of Vermont. It just happened that way. In some states, it's one or the other. And then I'll say, as a resource, since this can get confusing, where right now my district is leading an effort with the Vermont Law School to create a database of all 57 enabling statutes for conservation districts. And so that resource will be available by the fall. It'll be it's usable now, and we've been using it to kind of guide our internal discussions, but we want to make sure it's really accurate. So that's a tool that we are working on in coordination with VACD and with NACD, the National Association of Conservation Districts. So I'll talk a little bit about our elections. We are governmental subdivisions, so we're more like a municipality than a nonprofit, even though we are mostly grant funded and we kind of run like a nonprofit. So every year we hold elections. We have 5 elected supervisors who are residents of our district. A lot of our statute uses the phrase landowner for who can actually vote. Only landowners can vote in our elections, but residents may serve on the board. So that's just a distinction that Vermont has. The database is showing kind of the differences in this language across the country, so we can talk more about that. But Every year, one seat is up for reelection. They're 5-year terms. And we are responsible for holding our own elections. They don't align with other local elections. In practice, we don't get any votes. We rarely get more than one person who is petitioning to be on the board or has achieved the signatures that you need to run for our election. So in general, it goes to the appointment clause, and our board members have been appointed widely, I think, over the last at least decade, to our knowledge.
So what if there were contested elections though? How would that be handled? So if you had more than one person submit a petition?
There's not a lot of guidance for that, but in the past, from what we hear of the history, is that we would have a ballot box at our office. Some people would do mail-in. I've seen districts put up, like an online form to vote, but I'm not sure that it was ever even necessary. I think in recent years, folks have created an online form, but then didn't have more than one person running, so it didn't really matter. But in the past, I think it would be at our annual meeting. They'd have a ballot box and people would vote at the annual meeting.
John?
Go ahead, Jed.
At those annual meetings, does the chairman announce a slate of officers or candidates
They would
and open the floor to
for election.
vote either verbally or by a paper ballot?
In theory, I've never seen it done, but in theory, that would be probably the way that it would be run. Yes, maybe several decades ago. Yes.
Amazing.
And I just wondered who are eligible voters in, say, your district?
Eligible voters are currently landowners in our district, and that's specific to Vermont. Eligible candidates are residents of our district. In order to vote, you must be a landowner and a resident. I believe there's that residency requirement. Eligible elector or supervisors are you must be a resident. That's the only requirement, and qualified in other ways and not a federal employee. Yeah.
But not necessarily tied to the land list or the town's voting list.
That's right. Yes, it doesn't say anything about being a registered voter. Other states do have that language where their requirement is just a registered voter in that county or state. Mm-hmm.
And recognizing that this hasn't happened in recent memory, so nobody really knows what would happen if you would need a list, presumably, of property owners so that you could check people off as they voted. Does somebody maintain a list like that?
Not to my knowledge. I imagine the towns do. Yeah.
We have not made it.
The towns do, but you're not the town.
We have not made it.
Okay. Representative Lipsky?
Just, the point of history of voting in America, being a property owner was a criteria in many states, but in modern times, maybe since the early 1960s, that was found to be an unconstitutional criteria for being able to vote. So what you're implying, you needed for some roles, you needed a landowner and a resident?
In order to vote, according to our statute, in order to vote in our elections, yes, you still have to be a landowner in Vermont.
I'm not wildly upset about that, but I think that would be questionable constitutionally.
That's interesting. Yeah. And of course, the origin is that conservation districts worked with private landowners. And it was meant to be kind of a self-governance system. That the districts would districts were members of traditional farmers. So they were supervising each other in terms of natural resources implementation. But we agree, and Jennifer, feel free to talk a little bit about your work in environmental justice, that this is something that probably needs to be
Well,
changed.
as a quick follow-up, we have taken testimony from a number of farmers who are not landowners in these times, who might lease a piece of the 10-acre parcel produce.
Right.
So I think it's something worth looking into.
Yes, and I don't want to speak out of turn since we represent our supervisors and we haven't really had this conversation with all our supervisors yet, but I will say this phrase landowner is used in several different instances throughout the statute of who we serve and how we serve them. So it's just something that, if you're taking a careful reading, it's something to look for. Okay, and this last slide I will share, it shows our supervisory unions that were referenced previously. So our governing bodies of each of the 14 districts are these elected boards of supervisors, which again are not required to be landowners, and have broad statutory directives to execute conservation projects throughout Vermont. And then what this map shows is these 6 supervisory unions, how we coordinate together and are made up of 2 or more boards. And then this shows the representation that we have on council, 1 union representative from each of these unions.
You'll get to this, but curious about the history of when the supervisory unions were formed and how often that might happen.
Sure, the time,
I don't know the
the
date
date of that. I'm pretty sure it happened, or it was allowed within the first iteration of the statute.
There's a separate chapter dedicated to supervisory unions, chapter 33, if I remember correctly. So when you go to chapter 31, you don't see it in there, but it's actually a separate chapter about supervisory unions.
And we're kind of curious about supervisory unions also, in a way, how to lean into them. That chapter 33 talks about actually hiring staff at the supervisory union level, hiring what they call a union conservationist. We don't have anything like that, but if that's a way to strengthen, our collaboration, it can be challenging. It would be wonderful. We've talked about a lot having regional administrative support. So to have admin support at the supervisory union level could be really helpful. So there are ways I think we could utilize this structure, but right now we really don't.
So from a practical sense, the council has one representative per supervisory union rather than district.
That's right.
So there's that. Is there anything else that?
And that representative would contact the other districts to get information and that kind of thing. And then for VACD, it's 1 district, 1 board member.
Okay.
So that's kind of interesting.
But that is, like you described, that's pretty much the function as it currently stands, is that's our representative to the council.
We've had good attendance. Just wanted to say that. It's been great.
Okay. I'll hand it over to Hillary.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Back.
Thank you. Hillary Solomon with the Poultney Meadowy Natural Resources Conservation District down in Poultney. And we did just see that half of our supervisory unions, we do have shared staff with the Bennington Conservation District and also the Rutland Conservation District, some shared agricultural staff. So there are some ways that we are working together regionally, which is nice. So looking at the powers of the supervisors, which I think is the part in our statute that we are most aligned with, we do these things. And of course, these powers are sort of delegated to the district managers to then oversee that work and our staff that completes this work. My favorite actually is number 1, these investigations and assessments. I think that part of the reason that we are in statute is to understand and know our landscape and our landowners. And I really enjoy doing these type of assessments. We do water quality monitoring locally. We've been involved in quite a few stormwater master plans, which identify stormwater projects in our municipalities. And we've done some of our own research using GIS information to figure out where phosphorus might originate from on the landscape and where it might land and be sort of a sink on the landscape. We also are involved with demonstration projects, and I think this is a place where when conservation districts were formed, UVM Extension was already in existence and NRCS was already in existence, and I think we're a great sort of intermediary between these groups. So where UVM Extension might be sort of the lead on a lot of research and new practices, trying out new practices, we then are able to take some of this information to local farmers. They try it out on their farms, and then their neighbors can see these practices being implemented sort of on their neighbor's farm. They can come, they can walk through the fields or see the equipment in action. And then we can refer, farmers to NRCS for funding and now Agency of Ag for funding. We actually have a demonstration project right now in our district. We're working with a local farm who is growing warm season grasses. As temperatures increase in Vermont, we're able to grow different types of grasses and crop, these are food for animals, for livestock. So we're working with a farm in Pulteney and also a farm further north who's on a different soil type. The farmers came together this winter. They brought their information about their yields and their nutrient content of the feed that was produced, the types of, soil amendments and practices that they used. We had local farmers come and they just shared this information, made a plan for what they were going to do for next year. So this is something that is sort of actively happening in our districts. Of course, soil erosion and stream bank stabilization are something that are in our statute and things that we work on very closely. We partner with different groups to do some of this work. Like, for example, the Nature Conservancy and Trout Unlimited are very active in our area, looking at the smaller headwater streams, and they would like to partner with us. We can provide sort of a workforce and also a connection to landowners in the area to help get them introductions so they can work in these headwater streams doing stabilization type projects. Just going to make sure I don't forget anything. Of course, and then number 6 in our statute, looking at the things that we provide and bring and share with landowners. The Pulteney Meadowy Conservation District has an equipment co-op. We have quite a few pieces of equipment that do conservation, that help farmers with conservation practices. Farmers can they're usually expensive, so we've gotten grants from the state, grants from Vermont Land Trust. We purchase the equipment, we keep it maintained, we insure it, we can help transport it to different farms across the district or in our neighboring districts. And then the farmers can try it out and see if they like it. And I just got a call from a farmer yesterday. They had decided to write a grant to Vermont Housing Conservation Board. We helped them with the application and with a letter of support. They had seen our equipment co-op and they decided they wanted to do something sort of similar themselves. It's a small spreader and it can spread different types of materials. So wood ash or chicken litter. They're an organic farm. They wanted to amend their soil in different natural organic ways. And they were sort of inspired by our model. And so they were going to do workshops on the farm. They were reaching out to us to help with those workshops and also let their neighbors borrow the spreader. And so they were forming their own little group with the spreader down in the Rupert area. Seeds and seedlings are specifically mentioned in our statute. Most conservation districts hold tree sales. We sell thousands and thousands of trees every year. Conservation districts do this across the country. So when we call nurseries, they know what a conservation district is. They sell us plants at very, very low prices, and we're able to then forward these plants on to landowners in our districts. So for dollars, you can buy trees, and it's very hard to do that if you go into a nursery. Obviously, trees are much more expensive than $4 or $5. And then I think there was something else. Okay. Structures. So number 7 talks about structures. We do have some structures that, we maintain. We have a native plant nursery, and so we have some structures associated with that. And now we have our office. But we also were more involved with structural projects on farms until just recently. We actually had multiple grants from DEC to help farms build small structures. So we worked with farms building exclusion fencing for rivers. for streams. We helped with some covered manure storage areas on farms. We helped with a lot of water diversion projects, so like gutters to keep water rainfall out of the barnyards, which decreases runoff from production areas. We also worked a lot with road runoff coming into farms. There were a number of times where road runoff would go directly into like a production area or a barn, and trying to just keep that runoff out of the production areas. And we had that funding until I think it was 2019 was the last time we were in charge of building a fence on a farm. So that has been in the recent past that we had more access to funds for structural projects. That now decisions were sort of made that it would be better to have either federal funding, so NRCS funding, build these structural projects, or Agency of Ag funding. And I don't know if Agency of Ag had more money now or sort of how that happened, but funding for those grants goes directly through those two groups now. And then the final one here that we're talking about today, number 9, is talking about administering, federal funding that might come to us. So we do have some cooperative agreements with U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for example. And so they would have funding for large projects like a culvert replacement or a dam removal. And they would write a contract with us to do the landowner outreach. So we're working on a bridge replacement project right now. There's a bridge built on a dam, and so the fish can't get past it. It's causing a lot of erosion. It's a flood hazard. And so we're doing the permitting for that. So it needs like 14 different permits. We're doing the bid, like we'll put all the parts of the project out to bid. We collect the paperwork, we make the payments, but then the funding itself for the subcontractors comes from our contracts with Forest Service or Fish and Wildlife. So we'll just invoice them for the project funding and then pass it on to those entities who do the construction. I think that is it for but we are actively working, I guess, on these pieces that are in our statute is what I was hoping to convey.
John?
A couple questions, Hillary. One, across the lake or across the Connecticut, do you work with conservation districts in other states?
We do. So I feel very connected with conservation districts across the country. One of my staff is a certified crop advisor, and the New York State conservation districts have an annual training for those type of certified staff. And so she goes every year to that. That's over in Eastern New York. There are similar trainings put on in New Hampshire. I've been down to, there are times where like the New England Conservation District send representatives together and we talk about specific things that we're trying to work on, and each state brings its own sort of slightly different perspective, and then we sort of talk through. And there are also annual meetings. And so I think everybody has at some point in their career been to an annual meeting, which are held around the country to, again, sort of try to align and keep abreast of what's happening nationally.
I would add across the river, we partner with the New Hampshire districts as well on a couple of grants actually through the Dairy Business Innovation Center. We work with, we have a couple cohorts of farms that are on both sides of the river. Districts are, we also couple on our equipment rental library. We coordinate that across the river too.
And the Washington County Soil and Water Conservation District is across the Medway River from us in New York, and we partner with them a lot. And there are a couple of conservation districts that run up, the side of Lake Champlain, and we all come together for meetings. They actually hold those meetings quarterly to talk about grants and fundraising. And of course, the New York districts are funded a little bit differently than we are, but.
The other thing was we had Sarah Pelkian last week, and I just wondered if you work with the sort of recreational economies, because it seems connected anyway with what you're doing.
Yeah. So we actually are our Slate Valley Trails is their house where they rent from us. And so it's funny because we align with them, but we don't compete with them for funding. And so it is a nice partnership. I think we're very aware of each other. We work in slightly different areas, but maybe in parallel a little bit. And we're certainly interested in our mission discusses like local economic viability. And that's where, we'll talk about the office in a second, but that our office building one of the things I love the most about that is that I think it's part of revitalizing the downtown of Poultney, which was in danger after Green Mountain College closed of becoming a little bit of a ghost town. But that is in our interest too, and that's the recreation economy, that's in their interest too. And so again, we're sort of parallel there.
An example where we cross over is restorations in fish and wildlife accesses on lakes. Often it's to the districts that are actually doing the restoration there. So, stormwater restoration, improving those accesses to reduce erosion. I just wanted to mention that we have a national association, which is a strong partner with NRCS. It has regional meetings, and the National Association is an advocacy organization that works on the Farm Bill and the conservation title in Congress. So there's this sort of historical role. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because we have more to share, but I just wanted to let you know.
Representative Lipsky?
Heather, quick question, just from my visualization. The Meadowy Pulteney watershed.
Do you want me to go back?
No, I see the map, but it doesn't show drainage.
Right.
Does that hit the Hudson to reach the Atlantic, or does it go out the Richelieu River to the?
It does. So we're like the headwaters of Lake Champlain.
It's part of the.
Yeah, so we're the southernmost drainage going north.
As is Otter Creek.
Yes, right. And Otter Creek is right next to us. So we drain in a little farther south and Otter Creek comes in right above us, above our drainage.
You're heading north.
We're all heading, yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. Who is this one? Claire. Or should I move back? So Claire, sounds like Claire will be our next.
Okay.
And Claire, you can introduce yourself.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Claire Ireland. I am in Waitsfield, and I work as the finance director and the administrator for the State Natural Resources Conservation. For the Natural Resources Conservation Council. And I look at our next slide here is the. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit of noise, so I can't quite hear if you have questions, but this next slide is the establishment of districts as governmental subdivisions. And we do want to, I guess, again, emphasize that districts are governmental subdivisions that operate at the local level, and the local connection, as Hillary just mentioned, is really important to us because it helps us to better understand the specific issues that our communities are dealing with, both on the landscape itself and in terms of local resources. I think this helps us develop effective programming and work effectively with all the local partners. And then we do exist within this state and national structure. So we do have connections upwards to funnel information, as well as to funnel information both directions, and as well as connect to funding sources. We can go to the next slide. So 706 is the part of our statute that talks about funding through council. And we wanted to highlight, I think, this one sentence, which is any funds appropriated by the state federal agency to the State Natural Resources Conservation Council for allocation to districts organized under the provisions of this chapter shall be made available for the administrative and other expenses to districts. And I know you've heard a lot of testimony from us over this year and last about our need for funds. And this is sort of the crux of, I think, what we need. This, the way we read this section, it doesn't identify any particular source of funding, nor does it, identify any particular amounts of funding to be allocated to districts. But, this purpose, the administrative purpose of funding, is very much what we need right now. As you've heard from Hillary and from Jennifer, right now our funding structure is heavily, it's competitive grants. Even at the council level, we have a base allocation in our core services agreement. But beyond that, it's all competitive grants. So, I would say 90% of our budget, 95% of our budget is from competitive sources. So that means that, our staff at the council level, including my position as the administrator, is grant funded. And all of us manage grants. So I personally manage 2 grants that go down to districts, and that does take quite a bit of my time. And then my position is written into other competitive grants that we receive from other sources, which can be a challenge because, when something is grant funded, it is subject to the terms of the grant agreement and needs to produce the deliverables that are written into the grant agreement, which can be challenging since very few grant sources will fund administration. So, things like, the basic bookkeeping, the policy work, working on our internal procedures and, assisting districts with theirs, that is a need currently. We do have, we've looked at what other states do, and we're happy to talk more about this, but in general, there are some different approaches that other states take. Oftentimes in other states where they have strong county government, districts might be organized along county lines and either be a part of the county budget or receive appropriations from the county level. Other states receive direct appropriations from the state level or have funds set up at the state level to fund conservation districts specifically. So we're happy to provide more information about that. But, the challenges that we face are, I believe, largely tied to our funding model. But that said, we are extremely grateful for the funding that you've provided this past year. And we can go to the next slide. We've had a sort of a backlog of need. I think over most of our history, we've developed sort of a mindset of having to make do with less. And because of that, we've ended up with some needs on the table. And just this past year, we're able to finally start meeting those. So Hillary, I will pass this off to you to talk about, but this was big for us. Hillary?
Thank you. Yes. So we are not co-housed. I think you've probably heard this, but we are not co-housed with NRCS. And so we have always kind of floated around a little bit. And so this whole block of buildings that's in the picture was vacant in Poultney, and we were renting above a paint store, which wasn't very accessible. And we could look down on this vacant block of buildings, and through your allocation for this fiscal year, we were able to purchase the cream-colored building, and Slate Valley Trails rents one side from us, and we are in the other side. And there's supposed to be a coffee shop opening up in the next building, so we're really excited. The Nature Conservancy used to be on Green Mountain College campus also. So the Poultney Meadowy Conservation District had offices at Green Mountain College. When it closed, our native plant nursery was located there, and the Nature Conservancy was located there. And the Nature Conservancy now has an office across the street from us as well. So it's a nice little hub of activity now in downtown Poultney. And we have been able to have programming. We had a grazing class. We've had multiple workshops. Our plant sale is just finishing up. So we've been taking orders for our plant sale since February, and we get 2 or 3 people a day coming in to grab a plant sale order form or drop one off. We have staff every year for our native plant nursery. They've never had a place to go to the bathroom or, put a computer down because they've been at our nursery. So now that we have office space for them, they can come in and sit at our conference room. And we hire about 6 seasonal staff every summer, which is good for local economy. We try to have it be an educational experience. So it's an internship / job type experience for them as we try to build this sort of natural resources workforce or be part of that process that's taking place around the state. So we're really excited. We're really proud of our office. We're really proud of what we're doing. And yeah, thank you for that.
Senator O'Brien has a question.
Have any of the districts thought of asking towns directly for appropriations? In Tunbridge every year, I was just looking at it to see if you were there, but there's 20 different, everything.
Right. So we ask towns for donations every year, and we get $2,500 from our town donations collectively. So we ask for $500 donations. Towns have different rules about how you can do that. So we ask the towns that don't require us to fill out petitions every year. Some towns require a petition with so many signatures. The problem is that for a $500 donation, it takes so much of your time to get those signatures that it ends up being a wash. And then we do provide reports back to all the towns in our district with our activities that we perform in their areas, and we do tailor those to the specific town. So if we're doing water quality monitoring in Middletown Springs, we put that into their report and send, thank yous to the towns that do donate to us. So we have, 5 of our towns do make donations every year.
I know in Tunbridge, I think all we require is just a letter explaining what you do and an appropriation request, and you get it. So
and those are the towns that we would then make those requests to. But we have to be careful because, we fall, like, those requests tend to range from sort of $50 to $1,000. They're not big requests, and so of course you have to fall in that range. So it is helpful.
Yeah.
And it does go into our general fund, which we don't have very many sources for those funds. So that is.
I would say I was making a plan last year to do that and send letters out. It was just, I did not have enough time to do it last year. So it's I've raised it to my supervisory level and trying to get them engaged and maybe get their assistance with it. It's just the time commitment of, we have 23 towns in our district.
Representative Rice.
Yeah, just not necessarily for today, but just flagging, I think it would be really helpful to hear how other states are doing this, particularly how other states that aren't doing it through just county level funding. That being not incredibly relevant to us, but yeah, I think that would just be, I know that I would be interested in hearing more about that.
Claire, you mentioned the core services agreement. Can you explain what that is?
Yes. I'm sorry, that's what we call the appropriations that we get from you all through, and that gets funneled through the Agency of Agriculture. It comes to us as a grant, which is called Core Service Agreement. That's just what the name has been for the grant that we receive that we then pass on to districts.
Great, thank you.
just to follow up on, David and I were talking yesterday about, and I think what you were talking about, Jill, is if there's a national association or even regional associations, is there advocacy to potentially put in the Farm Bill some sort of base funding for all the districts across the United States? Like 10 million would go a long ways towards the districts, but isn't that...
Great question. The Farm Bill funds federal agencies and then they pass it down. There is a piece of Farm Bill that's very interesting related to the districts, and it's about districts managing local work groups where we consult local landowners about federal programs and provide feedback back up to NRCS. And we do that annually. We consider it, districts are involved in a lot of these public engagement processes, and we think of it as the other important part of what we do is that we represent local people. And it's actually in the Farm Bill, the local work group, part of the Farm Bill requirement. So NRCS will send us a letter saying, we're ready for you to have your local work group. We want to hear your input. And some districts have developed surveys, quite elaborate processes for eliciting input on federal programs, and then communicating that upwards locally. And then also through the National Association system, Vermont has one board member on the National Association, and they develop a policy book. And they do advocacy. They're a nonprofit, but they're an advocacy nonprofit.
Would that come with funding? Because it's time and work for you.
We pay dues to the National Association, and the districts haven't, because of COVID, but pay dues to VACD to support their work, their advocacy work. They have secured some grants from NRCS because NRCS wants to support the work that NACD does. You know, federal agencies aren't allowed to lobby, right? So there's a little partnership here where NACD does the lobbying. And they've given a couple of very large grants to NACD, which they are granting to districts and state associations.
But we don't get paid for the local work groups, though. That's
We don't.
something that.
They don't get paid for the local work groups. And it's equally burdensome administration, I have to say. These are federal grants. Federal grants are hard to administer.
I would say the challenge is for the Farm Bill and federal money to be directed to a state, like a subdivision of state government. I think there can be too many layers for that money to go directly to us. So it would probably, what they would do is put more money into NACD and then allow us to apply to the NACD grant. Like what would happen.
And I think too that, so there was a question about how the grant writing made it so it was challenging for us to be out in the field and to have capacity. And I think the other piece too is that there are funds available now through competitive grants, like more funding available. And so we have more, like Jennifer and I have more staff. And I would say for me, I spend so much time on grant administration, I have trouble overseeing my staff. And so when there's an opportunity for us to write a grant because funds are available, I just don't have enough time to oversee another person to do that work. And that having some funding that wasn't attached to all this administrative piece would actually free up time, not just to be in the field, but for us to build capacity by having more staff, because we'd have time to help them and oversee them and help direct their work, which would then be funded through these other grants.
Just one other thought or question/thought. We talked earlier about the landowner in elections, landowners versus residents. And we go back and look at the enabling legislation, but it's landowners, not just farmers. So all landowners. And I'm wondering, do you, in the work that you do, or how you think about the work that you would like to do, is it disproportionately with farmers, or is it in fact broader and really thinking about anybody who's got land?
Yeah, it is much broader. And in some of our programs, like we do a lot of work around our lakes. And so a lot of those are renters and people who are, coming in to rent a home and then use that lake. And so I think we think very broadly in terms of who we serve. But certainly forest landowners, municipalities, stormwater projects are usually in the more urban areas of our districts. And so we might be working with multiple landowners in a neighborhood. But yeah, I would say we think very inclusively.
We work with foresters to provide, we used to rent portable cedar bridges to foresters. This is sort of reviving again, just to reduce erosion in forest logging operations.
We talked about that.
That conversation.
Talked about it yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming in this morning, and good to hear that you're thinking about the statute, and we'll definitely be staying in touch. And if there's more that you'd like to share again this spring, if there's time, we'd certainly be interested in hearing more.
We appreciate your questions, and Meg has been taking notes of every question you've asked, and we'll be happy to continue to answer them. And we're forming our own questions, and as we consider, how should we modify the statute to make it relevant for who we are now. This core part that Hillary just covered, the duties of supervisors, is the essence of what we do, and the rest is kind of the infrastructure that supports us, and how to make that strengthen the opportunities for districts to make a meaningful contribution. We'd be happy to come in either this spring or next fall with some suggestions and update you on where we are. As Jennifer mentioned, the Vermont Law School is doing a national project of analyzing the statute with Jennifer's initiation. And the NACD, our national association, is supporting that effort. So we are gathering data about what's happening in other states. So we can also share that in the fall.
I think too, just to sort of, for me, I think we've suspected or known that our statute has been a little antiquated, but it's a little scary to get in there and open it up because you don't really know what direction these changes might take. And so we are a very historical group. And I think I value that piece of our history and our sort of origins as a peer-to-peer sort of network in times that were, during tough times and trying to help, at that point, farmers stay sort of afloat.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Representative Superman?
Thank you so much. If we wanted to find a list of the projects that are happening within the districts, is that something that's available?
We could,
Yes, so we've given you the cheat sheet and we have given you a link to the annual report. I'm happy to resend that link.
Sure. Thank you.
We have a one pager and we also have a story map, which is a really nice presentation. So we talk about the program areas and then there's some examples of a couple of projects in each program area. It's really lovely.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
and districts have websites too. That's a piece that sometimes they're not quite up to date because we don't have time to update them, but I think like ours shows the types of projects. They might be last year's.
Great.
Yeah, it's definitely some information there too.
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire and Rick, also.
I can see you in this picture.
Yes.
Yeah. Is it you?